Cool. All right, so we're live. Welcome, everybody, to this Liquid Collective event. It's about developing Node Operator Performance Standards. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It's really interesting, and I'm excited for all the speakers that are here today, too. So before we begin with a little bit of intros, I just want to say if you have any questions, just put them in the comments section, and if there's time at the end, we'll try to get to those after the discussion's over. So I'll start. My name's Aaron. Currently, I do some angel investing at a company called Ambush Capital. Previously, I started Bison Trails, which eventually became Coinbase Cloud. And so I will pass it over to the speakers. Just do name, company, and role. We can start with Brian, top left.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Robbins. I lead engineering for the Coinbase Cloud staking platform. And as Aaron said, formerly Bison Trails, and glad to keep running it and glad to be here today.
Cool. Go to Dimiter in the middle.
Hi, I'm Dimitar. I'm at Alluvial. Alluvial is the software development company supporting the development of the Liquid Collective. I work as a product manager. I've been with the company for almost a year. Glad to be here, guys.
Cool. Hey everyone, Josh Fair here, Senior Product Manager at Figment. I was been at Figment for about 2.5 years, changed roles throughout, but Senior Product Manager I think is the place where I belong. And I am owning two things. One is that everything has to do with risk that we provide, basically the coverage that we provide our customers, and making sure that we at Figment have the best possible insurance policies as well. So helping educate the market to bring additional insurance capacity. And I'm also working on providing statements for our customers. So anything that has to do with rewards reporting.
Awesome. And I'm Elias. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Rated. Rated is a Web3 infrastructure and data company working on reputation for machines. And we can get into what that entails. I was formerly a protocol specialist at Bison Trails. And then later at Coinbase Cloud, so all kinds of interesting threads here. I'm excited to be with you all and excited to talk about all the good stuff that we worked on over this project.
Awesome. So yeah, so with that, why don't we just jump in? Elias, so Rated Labs is a Web3 infrastructure company, and you, like you said, you're working on reputation for machines. So it's kind of a two-part question. The first is, what does that mean? And I think the second is, why do you view the development of objective measures as so important for the space?
Yeah, it's reputation for machines is actually like a very broad and expansive sort of field. The way, at least the way I see it, and it's purposefully so, right? Like the very crux of the idea is that increasingly more so, machines run very critical parts of the modern world, right? But we never think about sort of machines having reputation, as in sort of doing good or doing bad, or even like doing right. They just exist somewhere in the background, and they just help the world move along. But very often, machines sort of are the agents of their operators, right? And if an operator can have reputation, so can the machine, and then vice versa. So it's basically like a dual and ambidirectional relationship there. So specifically in what we do, we see reputation as basically manifesting upwards from the data that these machines produce, and then how this data is contextualized, and really contextualized in three distinct categories, which can have, subjective definitions or more objective definitions. It really can be arranged depending on the use case. But it's really performance of these machines. It's the risk that these machines carry that is idiosyncratic about them and judged by the context that they exist in, and then the externalities that they actually produce, which again can be like a pretty broad definition there. So our mission is to basically just instantiate all of that, starting from Ethereum validators. And the whole story arc starts from kind of the Bison Trail days, really, having sort of been very early to all of these networks, having been, as Aaron very, very well knows, like very early in Ethereum, proof of stake, and so on, and then seeing those ecosystems just really just balloon into very big and consequential pieces of network technology, and then having no context about the network, having no context about how an operator performs, what performance actually means, and all of that stuff. So these are mostly the things that we put our time in.
Awesome. And so, like, why is that important? Is sort of the, so now that we kind of understand what it is, like, what does that do for us?
It's important for many reasons, right? It's important for coordination between industry actors, right? To be able to speak a common language and understand the same version of reality. Without a common language, we all look at the same thing, but we call it different things, and it's like a Tower of Babel type situation. And this can have like many positive effects in terms of how the industry coordinates, how the industry grows thereafter, and so on. It's also really important in terms of onboarding new participants in the industry, right? And kind of abstracting the nuances and complexity of a given network into higher level abstractions that actually mean something to participants that are at the margin but haven't yet kind of adopted participation in these types of networks. And then these abstractions can be we think useful in terms of all kinds of things, like creating cost efficiencies, like creating economies of scope, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of value that is and can hereafter be created from really focusing on these types of constructs.
Cool. Makes a lot of sense. I also love that it's like a third-party objective. Like, you're not, everybody's self-reported for a long time, and that is good, but not as meaningful necessarily.
That's right. Agree.
So, all right. So moving on, I want to talk a little bit to the Alluvial team. And so Alluvial, as you said, is a software company that supports the development of the Liquid Collective protocol. And I think you, Dimitar, you worked specifically on the Node Operator Working Group. And so can you kind of talk about what that is, where it came from, how it's evolved over time?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Aaron. So just want to start by recapping what the vision and mission of Alluvial is, which I think is relevant for the question. So the vision is to empower global participation in securing the decentralized internet. And our mission is to collectively build the most trusted and secure liquid staking standard. So given our vision and objectives as a company and a member of the Liquid Collective, together with the fact that node operators play a very important role in performance and security of the protocol, we knew early on that we need to have an objective way to evaluate node operators. This was also validated with feedback from current and potential customers, considering that Liquid Collective protocol is designed to address the staking needs of institutions who have high compliance and regulatory standards. So it was clear that we needed, a framework to establish and maintain competitive enterprise-grade performance for the protocol, and also help our customers and their end users to make informed investment decisions based on accurate performance metrics. At the same time, we observed that there were different approaches in the industry for evaluating node operator performance, and what was missing was a uniform set of metrics to objectively assess the performance of node operators. What we were looking for was a clear and objective way to accurately evaluate the performance of node operators and their validator fleet in and across active sets. We wanted the methodology to sufficiently minimize or isolate random factors that are not controlled by node operators, like execution layer rewards. We also wanted to have a methodology that is easy to understand by stakeholders, customers, and the wider community. So at the time, the Reddit team had already done a lot of great work in the space, so we connected with them to collaborate on defining a performance standard based on our objectives. We looked at several approaches to measure performance and landed on the Raver, which measures how well a node operator performs deterministic duties at the consensus layer. We also decided to complement Raver with a benchmark for missed blocks to optimize the methodology for execution layer rewards. There's still some work left to finalize the missed blocks methodology, which we hope to deliver in Q1 of next year. So I think it's also worth noting, as we worked on to define a performance methodology that optimizes for consensus layer and execution layer rewards by looking at validators' deterministic duties and missed blocks. We also needed to start defining constraints from a risk point of view, so that we can strike, the right balance between optimizing rewards and minimizing risks associated with running validators. So just a quick forward-looking statement here. We are well on the way to define an open risk evaluation standard for node operators, and we hope to open the risk methodology for the community feedback in the near future. So once we release the risk methodology, we'll have more to say on how we plan to quantify and strive to minimize risks associated with running validators. So to get back to the timeline, from there, the next big step for us was really to present the methodology to the experts in this space who are also here with us today, and work with them to validate our approach and improve it. So at that point, we formed a task group with members from Rated, Alluvial, and also the 3 Liquid Collective node operators, Figment, Coinbase, and Kraken. The task group met multiple times, and we were able to walk away having aligned behind an improved performance methodology based on the Raver, and a performance benchmark for the Liquid Collective node operators. The work of the task group culminated really in enshrining the performance methodology and benchmark into a node operator SLA, which I think is an industry first for liquid staking protocols. So I think at this point it's important to know that this is the first version of the methodology, and we need to keep improving it to make sure it remains relevant. The methodology right now is public on GitHub and free to use, and we hope to engage the community to get more feedback and ideas to improve it. And if you're listening, please get in touch with us and give us your feedback.
Awesome. It's awesome work. So I guess just going back to Ilias quickly so you mentioned Raver, which is the rated validator effectiveness rating. Can you just break it down a little bit? And then really, how does it differ? Because it sounds like you guys did evaluate a bunch of different performance metrics. How does it differ from other ones?
So what it is and what it does is really quite simple. It takes the spec of a protocol. It then looks at what jobs a validator is supposed to be performing, and then basically assigns a completion rate to every job, right? So I need to attest on time, I need to propose blocks, and then there's a few other jobs specifically in Ethereum that a validator needs to actually perform. And what it then does is actually reduce dimensions on things like, for example, sync committee participation, which is like a very, very small subset of the jobs that validator needs to perform. And it's very highly correlated with actually performing all the other duties successfully. So reducing basically the unnecessary bloat in terms of statistical sort of accuracy and efficacy in the model. What it really shines in is what Dimitar alluded to just a bit earlier, which is it ascribes as much as possible a performance to what is under a validator operator's control, right? What they can influence. A validator operator can, to a large degree, influence latency, influence uptime, influence a few different parameters by the way they tune their infrastructure, if they are prompt with their upgrades, if they provision their machines with ample resources. And obviously, like if they take undue risk, this will also show, right, in the form of getting slashed, in the form of having a prolonged downtime or underperformance and so on. So that's really kind of what it is the best at, and it's the best at that compared to a bunch of different metrics that we also compared it to, including metrics that are rewards based and are looking at like, okay, how much rate of return based effectively, which actually introduce a lot of noise. Specifically in the execution layer of Ethereum, Validators are tasked with proposing blocks, which is basically a job of collecting both consensus and execution layer information and packaging it together in a block form and pushing it towards finality. Anything that happens in the execution layer is completely outside their control, but it does factor into their rewards. So it doesn't really add any useful information in terms of performance. In fact, it introduces a lot of noise. So we really basically it was a head-to-head decision between a metric that we called OpCost2, and it's almost the inverse of Raver, looking at, okay, what is the theoretical maximum of consensus layer rewards that a validator can earn, and then look at the delta basically between the rewards that you actually earned and the theoretical maximum. But it's both, that one was both harder to replicate and compute. It's a little bit harder to reason about. And also, given that we had already done a bunch of work on the Raver, we host a Network Explorer underrated .network, and the Raver features pretty prominently there for the better part of 1.5 years now. And operators have actually gone through the trouble of not only sort of adopting it, but also hardening it and replicating it and taking the methodology and building it from the ground up and to actually match our results with theirs. We had also built a lot of trust with the broader community, and so we thought that judging all the factors available to us, that was the one to go with.
Cool. I think it makes sense. I love the first principles. What do we really need here to evaluate performance? And rewards are awesome, but not necessarily controllable. All right, so we've heard from Alluvial and rated a bit, but I'd love to move over to our node operators. So maybe I'm a little biased when I say this, but I think it's true. So Coinbase Cloud and Figment are two of the top leading staking providers. And I'd love to hear your perspective on Raver. How did you think about evaluating it? What did you learn along the way? And what type of insights did you develop? And we could just start with Brian, then go over to Josh.
Yeah. So first off, just want to say, we're very excited to be a part of this. I think things like Raver are very important for the community, and it's really interesting and exciting to standardize a performance SLA. All the things that Alias and Demeter were just saying are absolutely true. That this is something that helps move the industry forward. In terms of kind of what did we learn and significant learnings, I mean, the first one I'd say is it's really hard to do. Finding and aligning on fair benchmarks that lots of different stakeholders can get behind is not an easy task. And there were a lot of interesting discussions that got us to this point. A couple of the specifics that I know we talked a lot about is, historically Coinbase has used fixed targets of, say, like a 99% SLA. And that's a decent approach, but ultimately things like large scale outages or issues on the broader Ethereum network may make hitting that SLA impossible through no fault of any operator or sort of any specific operator. But at the same time, when things are working well, that target of 99% may be too low relative to the rest of the network, and it may not actually be a very good judge of how well you're performing. So, ultimately the Raver network and kind of the benchmarks are relative, but relative is also challenging because it's an always moving target, and we need to constantly be focused on how do we perform relative to other people, and we can't just say we're hitting 99%, so we think we're good. We've got to just constantly be pushing ourselves to perform better. But ultimately, this whole process was a great opportunity to compare notes, reflect on our performances and setups. Was great talking with the folks from Kraken and Figment, and ultimately, I think this is helping make all of us better and improving all of our best practices. And love kind of just getting a chance to listen and learn from each other in terms of how do we do this and how do we do this really well.
Awesome. How about you, Josh? How did Figment think about all this?
Yeah, so similarly, like we appreciate, first of all, having a space at the table. I think us as node operators know how the sausage gets made in the back end. So it's important that some of the nuances get factored into coming up with the methodology and benchmark. So just having our voice heard, I think, was very important when coming up with like a public facing methodology like this. What we've seen and heard firsthand thus far is that people tend to rely most, anyone that wants to get involved in staking, they rely most on the staking reward rate. And ultimately, as Demeter and Elias so eloquently noted, was that there are factors outside of the control of staking providers. So an example of that would be luck. You can have a very high MEV block. You can have more than average opportunity to propose blocks. And all of those will impact your reward rate performance. But those are things that a staking provider can't control. So first and foremost, what was important for us was setting a benchmark that is entirely within, or as much as possible within, the staking provider's control. And Raver did an effective job of peeling out those factors like luck. What is important, though, is going into these conversations was that just looking at reward rate isn't necessarily adequate. So even Raver, in and of itself, it also needs complementary aspects like missed blocks and missed proposals to be taken into account, as well as what happens if there is a slashing event. So those are two factors that holistically come up with a methodology that can evaluate a staking provider. I think the core learning throughout this process was that there is no silver bullet metric or benchmark that could also take into account that there are factors within staking providers' control that can reduce risk exposure. So, for example, you could distribute your nodes into different geographies. And then if you are somewhere that is not concentrated like in the US, there could be some latency impacts. Similarly, you can choose a less commonly used Ethereum client, which could also create some negative impacts or latency, but at the same time is encouraging diversification, which is better for the network as a whole. So that's why having a healthy margin between kind of the median or the mean performance and where the benchmark lies is extremely important, because you want to have that diversification to have a healthier network and reduce any correlated risks known as correlated slashing or inactivity leak.
Awesome. So there are some good questions in the chat. I'm going to try to ask like one or two more questions first to the operators so we can hear from them a little bit more, and then we'll try to fit in at least one or two chat questions. So I think just going back to Brian from Coinbase, what are some of the challenges in operating Ethereum validators at scale?
Yeah. So we take our position as one of the leading staking infrastructure providers very seriously, and ultimately it comes down to we need to balance the needs of our customers. We need to balance that with the needs of the company, and then we also need to balance it against the broader community and the broader Ethereum ecosystem. So, starting with our customers, many customers, as we've already talked about, focus a lot on yield and returns. And Raver here, I think, helps because while it doesn't specifically measure yield and returns, it does give consumers the ability to look and independently evaluate how well companies like us are performing, and knowing that performance does ultimately impact the rewards over the long term. We also know that especially larger customers, but all customers care about risk, and things like slashing, correlated slashing, and the risk to principal is something that takes a lot to wrap their head around. And so, we always put the risk and safety of funds first, actively choosing security over liveness, things like ensuring we never have duplicate keys live, maintaining multiple double signing protections, all of those sorts of things. So that's the stuff that we do for customers and really kind of focus on the customers. But we also need to balance out the needs of the company, and that's balancing that risk against costs and reliability. And this is where operating at scale actually gives us an advantage, because we can leverage that scale as much as possible, and doing things like building centralized operational configuration tooling across honestly all of our protocols, not just Ethereum. And that helps ensure that we have a broad team. Anybody on my team can respond to almost any of our operational events, whether it's a network that they work with a lot every day, or whether it's one that they don't work with all that often, because we have these shared tools and shared tooling across all of our protocols. And we also look at, how do we reduce the blast radius, right? We operate thousands of validators across multiple regions, multiple cloud providers. So we do things like scaled rollouts, impact the smallest number of validators possible, or single regions, and really push ourselves to make sure that we don't have any single points of failure across, cloud provider, region, clients. All of these things lead to the ways that we can help balance that risk, while also reducing the cost and keeping our reliability as high as possible. And the third point, again, just coming back to community, the community is why we participate in initiatives like this. We think it really moves the industry forward. It's really focuses some of the attention where it needs to be. It's also why we announced like our public support for the proof of staking alliances, staking principles earlier this year. And Coinbase, we definitely feel like proactively engaging regulators is going to help strengthen trust in proof of stake networks and help us drive these financial tools into the future. And ultimately, it comes back to the health of the protocols is critical. It's critical for all of us, and it's something that we care very deeply about. And all of those things kind of come together for how we make decisions and the way that we operate our business on a daily basis.
Amazing. It's not the easiest job, but it's very, very important. So we have 5 minutes left, or a little bit less than that. I would love to really quickly. I think we'll probably move to this question from the chat, which is a pretty interesting one. And I think it's for Rated and Raver, but I think it also probably applies to everybody here. And so just what are the considerations for client diversity, if any? And how do people think about that?
Yeah, I have like a roundabout answer to this, but I think it's worthwhile. The TLDR, and I think like a high level consideration that we should keep in mind is that there is no one size fits all, especially when it comes to coming up with metrics and contextualizing information. It's a very seductive idea to think that you can basically collapse all the complexity, all the subjectivity that kind of bounds a certain domain area of expertise into like a one interface, right? And that would be ideal. That would be really an amazing world to live in, because it means that we can just like transmit information between people and even between machines and people and machines to machines a lot quicker. But it is also sometimes folly, and us having spent a ton of time and still spending a ton of time thinking about actually metrics, right? And contextualizing them, creating them, and imbuing them with signal. We've very often found that it's just impossible. Not only does it create confusion, but it also, when you're trying to do that, you're just setting yourself up for failure because you're overfitting. And then once the environment changes, the model or whatever that interface is just becomes really sensitive to the environment change. And then what you end up doing is you're working for the model, because you constantly need to tweak it and not the other way around, right? So what the Raver is a really great tool to surface and enable benchmarking and performance monitoring for operators, for the network as a whole, for different configurations, and so on. And it works really well side by side with different qualitative measures, like things like, hey, what's your slashing history? Have you ever been slashed in your operating history? What is your client diversity? And then the way we've specifically approached this framework with the Liquid Collective also is that it comes hand in hand with risk considerations, right? So basically first set your benchmark and your tolerance for risk, where considerations about client diversity, about how you deal with MEV, which relays you subscribe to, how many regions you operate out of, and all that good stuff come first. And then within those bounds, you optimize for performance. And this is where the Raver really shines.
Cool. That makes a ton of sense. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just wanted to quickly add that I previously mentioned that we do have a risk methodology that is currently underway, and diversity is going to be a big part of it. So once it's out, we should have a lot more to say about it.
Great. So yeah, so client diversity is a very important part of the risk metric, but maybe if we added too many things to Raver, it would stop meaning anything. Awesome. Okay, so that, I think we're at time. So I just want to thank all the panelists here. That was a really great conversation. We could probably keep going for a much longer time. There's a lot more like things that we could get into, but I appreciate everyone here. I appreciate the audience. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for listening. Yeah, and take care.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.